Camping in Pisgah National Forest was supposed to be an escape. My girlfriend Claire and I had been looking forward to it for weeks, a 2-night trip in one of the most beautiful spots in North Carolina. Pisgah is known for its breathtaking views, dense woods, and quiet seclusion. It was just what we needed after months of being stuck at home. We arrived at the park around 5 o'clock in the evening on August 18th. The drive itself was calming, the kind of winding mountain roads that make you feel like you're leaving the world behind. The sun was dipping low, and the golden light filtered through the thick canopy as we hiked about 3 miles off the main trail to find a campsite. The spot we chose was perfect, tucked deep in the woods with a small clearing surrounded by towering oaks and maples. A fallen log made for a makeshift bench, and there was even a fire ring left by previous campers. By the time we set up the tent, gathered firewood, and got a fire going, it was nearly 8 o'clock. The golden hues of the evening had faded to the deep indigo of night, and the sounds of the forest hummed around us. Crickets, owls, and the distant babble of a stream created a soothing soundtrack. It felt like we were the only people in the world. Around 10:30, we decided to call it a night. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the forest was alive with its usual night sounds. Claire climbed into the tent first, and I stayed outside for a few minutes, staring up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the constellations seemed brighter here, far from the city lights. I remember how peaceful it was as I lay down beside Claire. The cool night air seeped through the thin fabric of the tent, but the warmth of her body next to mine kept me comfortable. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me, the faint glow of the embers still visible through the tent fabric. Within minutes, I drifted off, lulled by the rhythm of the forest. I woke up to silence. It was 1:45 in the morning, and the forest was unnervingly quiet. The usual hum of crickets and rustling leaves was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against my ears. My stomach twisted with unease as I lay there, listening for any sound. That's when I heard it, a faint melodic hum. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but as I strained to listen, it grew clearer. It wasn't a natural sound. It was too deliberate, too human. The voice was high and lilting, rising and falling in a haunting tune that sent chills down my spine. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was faint, but it seemed to be coming from the trees behind my tent. I checked my phone. The glow of the screen confirmed the time, 12 minutes before 2. The faint light felt blinding in the oppressive darkness. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, nudging Claire. She groaned softly, but didn't wake. "Hello?" I called out softly, my voice shaking. The hum stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the leaves just outside the tent. My chest tightened as I grabbed the flashlight from my bag. The beam shook as I unzipped the tent and shone the light into the darkness. The clearing was empty. The fire was still smoldering, casting a faint orange glow, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. I held my breath, listening, but the footsteps had stopped. I zipped the tent back up and lay down, my heart pounding. Claire stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" she murmured groggily. "I thought I heard something," I said. "Footsteps." A whisper. She frowned but didn't say anything, pulling the sleeping bag tighter around her. "Probably just the wind," she mumbled. But it wasn't the wind. For the next hour, I lay awake, listening. The forest was still silent, the usual night sounds absent. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the trees themselves were watching. Around 2:45, just as I was starting to drift off again, the whisper came back. This time it was louder, closer. "Leave." I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering in my chest. Claire stirred again, and this time she heard it too. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The whisper came again, the single word stretching out like a hiss. "Leave." Claire's eyes widened as she grabbed my arm. "We need to go," she said, her voice trembling. Before we could move, a shadow passed across the tent. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a jolt of fear through me. I flicked on the flashlight and shone it toward the fabric, but there was nothing there. No outline, no movement. Just the oppressive silence. We sat frozen for what felt like hours, clutching each other as the whisper continued, interspersed with the sound of those slow, deliberate footsteps circling the tent. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The whisper stopped. The silence was almost worse. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I scanned the darkness, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Then, from the far side of the clearing, a branch snapped. It was loud, deliberate, like someone, or something, was letting us know they were still there. "Pack up," I whispered to Claire. "We're leaving." We moved as quickly as we could, stuffing our sleeping bags into our packs and collapsing the tent in record time. The footsteps continued, circling us as we worked, but never coming closer. By the time we finished, the first faint light of dawn was breaking through the trees. The hike back to the car was the longest 3 miles of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. We didn't talk, didn't stop, just kept moving as fast as we could. When we finally reached the car, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But as I turned to load our gear into the trunk, I froze. At the edge of the trail, just where the forest met the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows of the trees. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. "Let's go," Claire said, tugging at my arm. I didn't need to be told twice. We sped away, the figure disappearing into the distance behind us. To this day, I don't know who or what it was. All I know is that the forest didn't want us there, and it made sure we knew it. The Appalachian Trail had always been on my bucket list. I wasn't aiming to hike the entire thing, just a section that ran through the Smoky Mountains. The weather in September was perfect, cool and crisp, but not cold, with the leaves just starting to turn. It was supposed to be a 3-day trip, a solo adventure that would let me disconnect from the constant noise of life. The trail was stunning, even better than I'd imagined. By the time I reached the shelter where I planned to spend my first night, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light through the trees. The shelter was a simple 3-sided structure made of stone and wood, with a raised platform for sleeping. It wasn't glamorous, but it would do. I was the only one there, which didn't surprise me. This section of the trail wasn't particularly popular. I set my pack on the platform, took out my stove, and started making dinner. As I stirred the pot of pasta, I felt the first twinge of unease. There was something about the quiet. The birds that had been chirping all afternoon had gone silent, and the woods felt still. I had just finished eating when I heard the crunch of footsteps on the trail. They were heavy and deliberate, getting closer. I stood peering out toward the path. A man appeared, tall and wiry, with a shaggy beard and a faded blue jacket. He was carrying a massive backpack that looked like it had seen better days. "Hey there," he said, his voice raspy but friendly. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual. He walked closer, setting his pack down on the ground outside the shelter. He didn't ask to join me, which was the first thing that struck me as odd. Most hikers would at least check if the space was available, but he acted like he belonged there, like it was his. "You camping here tonight?" I asked. He nodded, crouching down to rifle through his pack. "Yeah, long day on the trail." I tried to make small talk, but his answers were short, almost dismissive. I couldn't tell if he was shy or just uninterested, but something about him put me on edge. The man, he'd said his name was Hank, sat on the platform across from me, silently eating from a can of beans. He hadn't lit a stove or even set up a sleeping bag. "Do you have much further to go?" I asked, trying again to make conversation. "Not sure," he said, staring at the ground. "I don't keep track of miles." I nodded, pretending to be engrossed in my map. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. I decided to call it a night. I climbed into my sleeping bag and rolled to the side, facing the wall of the shelter. Hank didn't say anything. I woke up to the sound of movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of fabric being unzipped. I turned over, squinting in the darkness. Hank's pack was open, and he was crouched over it, pulling out items one by one. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost methodical. I cleared my throat. "Everything okay?" He froze, his head snapping toward me. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just getting something to drink." I nodded, turning back toward the wall, but I didn't close my eyes. Something about the way he said it didn't feel right. I must have fallen asleep again, because when I woke up, Hank was gone. His pack was still there, leaning against the wall, but he was nowhere to be seen. I sat up, my heart pounding. Where would he go in the middle of the night? I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shining it around the clearing. The woods were eerily silent, the beam of light catching only the dense undergrowth and the outline of the trail. "Hello," I called, my voice shaking. No answer. I didn't sleep again after that. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my gear and decided to move on. Hank's pack was still there, untouched, which only made things stranger. Why would he leave it behind? As I shouldered my own pack, I noticed something tucked under one of the straps of his. A knife. It wasn't a typical camping knife. It was long, serrated, and the blade was stained dark. I didn't want to know why he'd left it behind. I started walking, keeping my pace brisk, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I reached the next shelter by mid-afternoon. My legs ached from the fast pace, but I felt relieved to have put some distance between myself and Hank's pack. The shelter was empty again. I debated whether to stay or push on, but exhaustion won out. I had just started setting up my sleeping bag when I heard footsteps again. My stomach sank. "Hey there," a voice called. I turned and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Hank, but it was another man, shorter, stockier, with a dirty baseball cap and a suspiciously large knife strapped to his belt. "Nice day, huh?" he said, stepping into the shelter. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, beautiful." He walked closer, his boots crunching on the wooden platform. "You here alone?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I didn't stay long after that. I made an excuse about wanting to catch the sunset further up the trail and left, even though I had no idea where I was going. As I hiked, my mind raced. Who was this new man? Was he connected to Hank? Was this just bad luck, or was something else going on? I found a small clearing off the trail and set up camp, hoping to put as much distance as possible between myself and the last shelter. I didn't light a fire. For hours, I lay awake in my tent, listening to every sound, every rustle of leaves. When I finally drifted off, it was with my knife in my hand. I never saw Hank, or the second man, again. I made it back to the trailhead the next afternoon, shaken but unharmed. But something about that trip stayed with me. The knife in Hank's pack. The way the second man asked if I was alone. Sometimes I wonder if I stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see.